Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, How to Build a Culture of Innovation. This is one in a series of webinars where we connect to bring to life the challenges we see in the market and what to do about them. During this session, Raphael Viton, Axion's Global Transformation Lead, and Tim Cutler, Director of Culture and Organizational Development at Human Synergistics, will share lessons learned from Axion's decade-long partnership with Human Synergistics, building more collaborative, courageous, creative, and agile organizations. We will host a Q&A at the end of the session, so if you have any questions during the presentation, you can use the question application, and we will answer them later in the call. And with that, I hand it off to you, Raph.
Thank you, Barbie. Welcome, Tim.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, let's dive right in. I know you and I both wrote our books that are shown here probably 4 or 5 years ago, and since then been working together on a number of different projects domestically, internationally, and so much new stuff, so much new content, emerging best practices and things we've been working on, writing about. I'm sure if we wrote those books today, they'd be quite different, and obviously today there's so much being written about this topic of culture change and innovation and digitalization and disruption, like lots of content and information available, lots of really interesting headlines. And for today's time together, let's focus on kind of bringing it down to a little bit more practical level, away from the headlines, where even a lot of articles, you know, as inspiring as they may be, you can't really get that much stuff into it to be practical. So this webinar is going to be much more about a how-to build a culture of innovation, and from a very practical level, the kind of projects that you and I have been working on together are very much rooted in this kind of typical case study that I'm just going to fly through as an overview right here, where there's a multinational organization that is hell-bent on shifting from this, you know, they've been diagnosed with having these criteria that are actually quite kind of working against innovation, working against the future, working against being a strong player in the industry and the way it's evolving, and trying to shift from being very bureaucratic to being more innovative. And this from-to shift that's here is quite typical. I'm sure most of the folks on the line would recognize a lot of these characteristics. And typically the work that we're involved in leads to, you know, a culture of innovation, part of the key strategy to help lead the global turnaround. And this example here, similar to others, is built around trying to enable the organization in terms of innovation, to be more innovative, leverage the knowledge that exists inside of the system and the communities inside of the system, increase the collaborative efforts kind of across the silos, across the regions and business units, and accelerate the speed to market, knowing that we're in a VUCA world today, and we really need to be able to deliver on these kind of attributes and maximize the partnerships to do all that good stuff. And often we hear this shift, companies wanting to shift from and to, and say, well, we need to reduce the stress. You know, people are too stressed out and there's too much drama going on. And I don't know about you, but the idea of reducing stress sounds a little optimistic from a system standpoint. And actually we see that the goal really isn't about reducing or relieving stress, but instead it's about how do we increase performance under increased stress, because the stress and the speed of change isn't going away, it's only accelerating. And these examples and the approach we're going to give produce increased engagement levels, increased motivation, which is different from reducing stress, right? And increased abilities to collaborate and increased creativity, and always rooted in what's the end business result we're trying to help shift to. And in this example, like many others, we're measuring and capturing what is the net positive business effect, and how do we help the organization quantify it so that you've got the evidence that you need to continue to keep iterating on building that culture of innovation. Now, the way those case studies typically start, though, in many companies, there's this a declaration where we are committed to updating the company's future, updating the company for the future. And I've even seen posters in some companies that have a slogan on it about soaring, into the future with new engines, and the excitement that builds around upgrading the culture and being more innovative is very strong, and it's very authentic, and it's very real. And there's, also very real, a strong commitment towards this new future. And that excitement and commitment often manifests itself in two different ways. And just keep going with the metaphor here of the airplane and soaring into the future. And often, this excitement and commitment is also met with a lot of skepticism, and it's skepticism for good reason. Skepticism for good reason because it's often either too light, like too fluffy, too superficial, inspirational, and not really enough substance. But once the CEO and the leadership team have declared that they're all in, they want to do this quickly, and they're committed to being, the next Apple, I'm sure you've heard that too, of the industry, then the declaration is made, and the idea of, okay, now we got to soup this airplane up with some new engine, some new horsepower. And if you don't get the new horsepower in there, it's definitely kind of delivering on that skepticism of being too fluffy. But on the other side of that, you get, you really load up the horsepower in terms of resources. Big organizations build centers of excellence around innovation. Innovation committees and councils are appointed, and the expectations are raised quite high. And it sounds good, it looks good, but unfortunately, the reality of it doesn't typically match what we intended. And rather than being the souped up airplane ready to take off and go into the future, it winds up being this bloated, weighted down, anything but agile and adaptive type of a thing, that's the best way to call it, this thing that never has a chance to get enough speed and momentum to get off the ground and go to where we want to go. So this approach that we're going to talk about today, and the one that we like to employ together, is about how do we reduce the friction and take weight off the plane while giving it some new engines and some new capabilities and competencies so that it has a better chance of taking off, sticking, and producing the results that you want. So that's the metaphor that's kind of behind the whole how-to approach here. And it's a much less risky approach than the heavy, bloated over invested in, and it's much more effective. So we talk about culture change, not for the sake of change for change's sake. And Tim, you and I see across across all of our clients different types of reasons for wanting to jump into culture change.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And we want the reasons to be about a specific business problem or outcome that we're trying to improve, but so often it becomes about a culture plan, or, in the same rights, an innovation plan, where we're going to go right to that, but we haven't really articulated what's the business impact, what's the business problem, and then let's understand how culture's helping us or holding us back when it comes to achieving those goals. Next slide there. So what's that outcome or business goal? I mean, these are just some examples of projects we worked on. It's often the number one priority in the organization in some form, whether that be quality, customer experience, but where the organization's at from an innovation perspective could be very different. Innovation at one organization when it comes to customer experience might just be listening to the customer and translating just a few of those ideas to action, while another organization might have a whole customer experience journey that they're well down the path of producing some very meaningful innovation. So it's about meeting the organization with where they're at and understanding their current culture, where they're at in their journey, and then applying this type of approach that we're going to talk about next.
Yeah, and we're going to keep coming back to, okay, what is the business goal? What is the desired outcome? What are we rooting this entire effort in? So just remember this slide, and each one of you on the line will have your own, portfolio of business imperatives and business initiatives that you're already working on. And the question is going to be hey, how do we use that business initiative as the best reason to practice this new innovative culture and these new innovative mindsets and skills? And And as Tim said, every company is different. Every company has a different muscle that it needs to be at its certain level of competency for innovation, to be successful in market. And because every company is different, let's use a model right out of the gate here that I'm just quickly going to touch on it. A model that helps kind of root us in what the gap is that we're trying to fill from a big picture perspective here. And so we are trying to fill a gap, and it sounds like this in most companies. You know, you hear an acknowledgement that we're not moving fast enough, we're not being bold enough to meet the new the customer's changing needs, we're at risk of not being relevant anymore, we haven't really shown commitment to long-term innovation, and quite frankly, we're optimized for efficiency, not innovation. What are we going to do about that? We're not very good at risk taking. We don't reward it. We don't really like it. We like safe, reliable things. We don't like risk taking. And you know, an acknowledgement that we don't have the culture that we need to win in the future. So part of this model is, and this is I'm going to oversimplify the model here, and it's this is a model that comes from innovation guru Doug Stone from Drive Strategy. He's a big systems thinker, and he's leveraged the work from Roger Martin, who's the dean of the Rotman School of Business, University of Toronto, and one of the early pioneers of design thinking and systems thinking, and author of many books. And Roger Martin's, you know, kind of overview, just again oversimplifying it, is that the inside of an organization there are two different systems at work, and it's an operational mindset that builds this system, right? So there's a reliability system. It's the current success formula that has worked really well, and it's predictable, and we monitor it and measure it, and we know what to expect. And there's this future eventuality system that it's uncertain, we don't know exactly, and it's very adaptive, and it's complex, and these wind up being muscles, not just systems, right? So in most companies, the reliability muscle is far stronger, far bigger, and it's the dominant power system overall. Both of these are at play inside of any organization all the time, and it's not about one needing to be bigger or stronger or not. It's about how do these two work together. And so ignore all that information, but the gap is, and in the culture of innovation and the innovation, you know, thing to focus on is, hey, how do we bridge the gap here so that we can be much more effective with these two systems? And so the gap to fill, the focus, you know, is going to be on how do people work together and do co-creation better? How do we prototype and test things for better decision making? How do our innovation assets and processes and work processes and portfolio management lead us to a structure that leadership can actually, you know, use the vision and strategy for the future to harness the culture overall and get us to that place we need to go and deliver the right business outcome. So this model is really just about filling that gap with different types of competency. So we talk about it often about, you know, and I'm just going to point here that the layers of competency and the things that we need to have, the structures and the governance models and measurements are critically important, but we're going to talk today about the people and the culture part, which are the essential elements that drive the gears above, and they wind up being the lens for what is the company ready for with relation to designing the gears, the white gears at the top. So let's talk real quick here as well about what works and what doesn't work. So what doesn't work is treating the effort like it's an HR or a communications project. This is where it tends to be more on the fluffy side, not rooted in the business impact and the delivery aspect of it. And that's where, you know, you often hear the phrase innovation theater or culture change theater, where there's really not enough teeth to it, not enough business connection to it. And it's episodic, event driven, almost like you go to a workshop and it's supposed to be fixed. You've got the tools you need, so now go back into the system and be innovative. And we all know that doesn't work. So, and when it's not integrated directly with the business, you typically don't get the traction. So what does work is treat it like a business prototype. That way it's going to be kind of inherently more connected and integrated with the business. Want to make sure that it is rooted in clearly defined vision in terms of the from to shift, right? You clearly articulated gaps, and we're going to talk about how to get very clear on what those are in a moment. And we're going to, the other things that what works is that when it's lifestyle focused, right? So it's long-term focused, rewiring, changing habits, unlearning some old traditions and things that are great and are operating in the background perhaps, and developing new, more effective traditions. And it's what works is focusing on mindsets and behaviors. And lastly, the idea of how do we do, there's no way to really predict what is going to work inside of an organization that's full of people, and we're talking about people as the culture. So the idea of how do we make it iterative? How do we make this a shared learning stretch experience where obviously it has to deliver results so that people will testify from a very personal and relevant standpoint that it works. So it has to work. People have to like it, like they have to enjoy working this way more than working the way they used to. And that's the only way it's going to operate long enough to stick, is if people like it and it delivers results. So the approach is designed with that in mind, and it's kind of as a way to help simplify for the folks on the line. There's two major fronts that companies typically need help with. One is the inner game, right? The ability to bring this individual, team, and organizational mindset shift to life, to shift from where you're at to where you want to go, this ideal future, these ideal more beneficial mindsets and behaviors. This internal game, this transformation is what's necessary to actually enable sustained behavior change over time. So the inner game is a very important focus we're going to talk about, and the outer game. So this is the execution part, and it's the real life experience of understanding how we are going to be together differently, how we're going to engage differently, and how we're going to lead the company while we're doing the work, while we're delivering results. And that's going to be the thing that translates those mindset and behavior shifts into something very actionable and long-term results. And the trick here isn't to think about these things, or isn't to design the approach going forward like they're two separate things, but instead, how can we think about intertwining these things? How can we think about prototyping, right? Treating it like a prototype where we're actually learning how to do both of these things at the same time. And just to give some clarity to the word prototype, and some people prefer the word pilot. They don't want to use the word prototype because it feels like you're prototyping on your business. And that is what we're doing. A pilot, prototype, whatever you want to use it, it's an experiment. It's a low risk shared learning experience. And it is this early model. It's a way of learning about what is possible for you right now. It's the early model of a thing that's going to be replicated or learned from. And it's a low risk way to accelerate results and then scale from those results. Let the results themselves be the thing that justify further investment and therefore further adoption and scaling the results, the successes. So that's we're going to use this concept of a prototype all the way throughout the rest of the dialogue. And it's intended to, like we talked about with the metaphor of the airplane, the bloated, too heavy airplane, is how do we reduce friction, engage each other differently, and accelerate the change. And the three kind of buckets we're going to talk through today are alignment. So first and foremost, how do we agree on what the business priorities are, what the gaps to close are, and how do we stimulate growth by agreeing to stay in the tension together, right? We're not going to relieve tension or stress. We're not going to, but we're going to find how to deal with that in a much more constructive, generative, healthy way. Tension's good. Creative tension's good. How do we get alignment so that we can agree to stay in it together? Long enough to build the new muscles, to build the new mindsets, and get to a place where the transformation aspect of it is where we're going to focus on that. So how do we master these different levels, these levers, the mindsets and behaviors, so that we can increase the quality of ideas, the quantity of ideas, the depth of trust and relationship in service of better business outcomes, right? This is the second piece. And the third piece is execution, operationalizing, collaborating, doing the work together in a way that delivers value and builds that critical mass of capital, right? That's the evidence we're looking for. That's the successes that we're looking for, which will be proof proof points that we are winning and that we will win even more if we scale this thing and get further adoption, and that helps kind of pull us forward as opposed to trying to push us forward. So, and again, the prototype piece is how do we do these things at the same time together? And the first piece we're going to jump into then is the alignment part, about accurately diagnosing the culture gap and aligning around the actionable from to. And it's going to be anchored in a case for change. And Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk us through the diagnosis part.
Thanks, Rafa. And you know, I love what you talk about there with the helix and the mindset shift that's needed. So, you know, if I truly do believe that a more inclusive approach would be better, need to be more curious, I need to involve more. If I can't translate that to the how-to side of actually engaging differently and figuring out different approaches, then that mindset shift, you know, won't translate to the results we need. So when we start to look at and understand the from to shift needed, it's important to understand that the most of what we see out there that people talk about as being culture is actually by definition about the work climate. And I'll move through this quickly. Some of you on the line, I know, have seen this slide and a few others before, but climate's all about the surface. You know, is the mission clear? What are we doing as far as teamwork, involvement, engagement? But if there's an issue in the work climate, it could be due to many different underlying cultural reasons. Some of those look like on the left, you know, where we want people to feel expected to take on challenging tasks, to proactively share ideas, plan ahead. But some of those expectations, or you might have heard of unwritten rules, are like those on the right, where people feel they can never make a mistake. We're not supposed to not rock the boat. We point out flaws, or we're expected to push decisions upward. And it goes without saying that these can really submarine in the innovation efforts. Next slide. So we want to understand this culture from two perspectives. First of all, what's the ideal? What are we targeting? And then what currently exists? And there's typically a gap. And if we don't get a language around this and understand what's driving it, how the organization has been built, what are those system structures, how leaders are leading that's reinforcing that current state, if we don't understand that well, then it's difficult to manage that from to journey to get more towards the ideal that we feel is necessary to deliver on our strategy. Next slide. So we want to get a clear language around this, and the current expectations might look somewhat like the things on the left, where people feel kind of expected to switch priorities to please others or take few chances or push decisions upward. And we want the expectations to be more about what's on the right, where we actually feel expected in this organization to help others grow and develop, show concern for people, plan ahead, and those types of things. So hopefully you can see by just looking at these examples, understanding this at a deeper level and what those expectations are, help us give a real solid grounding to that from to shift. So it's not just what, you know, a top leader might say that shift needs to be, or another team, but we've got some data behind it all to match with that qualitative work that might be done through interviews, focus groups, or other means. Next slide.
Well, and Tim, the idea of, you know, shifting from like that Post-it note slide that was using very anecdotal, it feels like this is our gap, and the idea that leadership and has a different feeling and perspective of the gap than, let's say, mid-level folks, and which is going to be very different than frontline folks. So the idea of, hey, let's make sure our perspective, make sure the data we're using to come up with the gap and the language around the gap, and before we start making plans for what problem to solve and what muscles need to be built first, you know, the idea of having a strong, accurate, objective diagnostic that gets to the root of the matter is really important. So we're always, you know, working through what's the best way to blend both the qualitative diagnostic work and the quantitative. So we can use the models of the quant research in a way that we can apply lots of curiosity and invite lots of other people into it with curiosity to really get to the bottom of, hey, what do we think this means? What does it really mean? And we're working with Human Synergistics, we have access to a very integrated diagnostic system, which is why the partnership has been so successful for so long. It's, it's very flexible and adaptive to the needs of every single one of our clients. But at the bottom line of it is, we're using the diagnostics to raise the awareness in a way that we can consistently all understand. When we hold up that mirror, we see what's really going on. We've got a baseline. The gap can be clearer. The articulation of the vision and the strategy is based on something that we all are, familiar with and believe in. And it really invites people and involves them in a way that without it, it's just opinions. So and this gives a much more informed way of starting where they are versus starting where we think they are. So I love how this kind of takes us to, just a look at the integrated system, and we don't have time to go through the whole suite. And I know this is only some of the tools that you guys use, and that we use across many different clients. But it's all rooted kind of in the circumplex, and if it's okay with you, I'm going to shift to the next slide, Tim, and let you take it from here about talking through the circumplex as a model.
Sure, and just to emphasize one thing on the slide you showed about integrating qualitative and quantitative, we're always starting with the qualitative, right? So leadership might think there's issues with accountability or issues with execution or whatever it might be. But as we go deeper in the organization and understand what's really driving that current state, we might find, well, there's communication issues and goals and roles aren't clear and lots of things that make accountability, innovation, and other things difficult. But let's look at the circumplex so we can talk about how the model helps accelerate this understanding. So we look at three general clusters of norms or expectations, and we do that ideal versus current. And when we do the ideal, basically leadership says, well, we want these very constructive or blue expectations, which are a balance between the task side, kind of making and meeting goals and showing genuine care and concern for people. But when we do the current culture assessment, we might see some of that blue, but we might see a lot more of the red and green, the red being more aggressive defensive, and the green being more passive defensive, avoidant, conventional, approval-related behaviors and expectations. So we create a gap, basically, and get a visual image of that gap and a language behind it. Next slide. Now I'm going real fast here, kind of jumping to the end result of this. The results shown this How Culture Works model, where on the left side, you've got this picture of what are we ideally targeting in the terms of values and beliefs around what should be expected in the organization to drive effectiveness. We compare that to the current culture, the picture on the right, which is the norms and expectations, those unwritten rules driving behavior in the workplace each day. But we've got two other pieces to this, and these are actually areas of the work climate. Climate is incredibly important because these are some of the reasons why there might be a gap between what we're ideally targeting and what currently exists. So we dive into that and understand various structures, systems, how leaders are leading that help us understand what's reinforcing that current state. So if we don't understand that, we can go at the from to all we want, but we've got to make some adjustments to how we're leading and how we're coordinating improvement efforts if those improvements are going to be successful. Any comments on this model, Ralph? I know you love using it.
Yeah, and because it clarifies where we're at today and captures a model of how leadership, the vision that leadership has of where we want to be, and what's in the middle here that we need to dive deeper into. And as opposed to lots of times we hear folks say, hey, we don't need a diagnostic to tell us that we're not innovative. We know we're not innovative. let's just get started. Let's just build a culture plan. And it's like, well, we actually, we don't have enough information to build it effectively. And this starts to dimensionalize, oh, that's the kind of information, causal factors and levers that are really important for us to figure it out. And oh, by the way, if you look at it from the different dimensions of success, from an individual level, team and group level, and the overall organizational level, it's so much more informative. I honestly don't know how business units invest the way they do in culture change without having this information and this data available. I don't know how you align and feel good about the strategy of culture and development and investing in any of that if you don't have this information. And it's not like it's cost prohibitive by any stretch of the means in terms of the money that you're going to be investing in actually building those other muscles, shifting and learning and failing together anyway. So that's my soapbox.
Appreciate that. And in that same framework, that How Culture Works model framework, this is just an example of the reporting under that, just one page of a summary report where the organization gets that picture of what are they ideally targeting, and it's always very blue. And they get that picture of the current state, but they also understand, we call them these levers for change or causal factors, these areas of the work climate that are reinforcing the current state. So perform the mindset shift all you want, and people can believe I want to operate more like our ideal. But if we don't, begin to evolve how we built this organization that's reinforcing the current, that mindset shift really won't help us translate things to results. So there's a lot of detail behind this, and we just wanted to show kind of from a 50,000 feet view. Next slide. Now, when it comes to using that information in combination with what we've learned from the qualitative, so, if there are these gaps, well, what are the beliefs that are driving them? What are the behaviors that are a challenge? We try and get a common language description around the from state. In this case, it was an organization looking to dramatically improve quality, but they felt they kind of had a get her done culture with a lot of silos and collaboration issues. And the specific behaviors were, they saw people taking action without team involvement in decisions. There wasn't really open debate without fearing consequences. People weren't comfortable sharing ideas and problems. And you're not going to change that overnight. But they did have a vision of, we want a collaborative, agile, cross-functional culture focused on our clients and business results. And they translated those from behaviors to the to behaviors they're really targeting. So they wanted to be comfortable involving, giving feedback, resolving disconnects, listening and thinking through things with open debate, that creative tension that you talked about before, and proactively sharing ideas and problems with respect. So we're going at things now, supporting this from to lens, instead of being all about the to state, right? Without really understanding what's the from and how's it playing out in our organization.
And I would say, I'd say too, just in this from to example, you notice the word innovation isn't used here. Collaborative, agile, cross-functional, like all these, it doesn't matter what words you use. Like some people get really hung up on the word innovation, like it's overused, we can't use that word, the CEO doesn't want us to use that word anymore. Okay, it doesn't matter what word you use, the work is still the same to be done. You still got to be more customer-centric, you still got to be more adaptive, and you got to do it with people. So this, I know words matter, but at the same time, the data here and the from to, whether it perfectly fits into a stereotypical culture of innovation from to or not, it's legit, and it gives you a great foundation to start the planning process and have people be emotionally bought into, okay, that's what we're doing. I understand it. It does matter. I see how it's going to connect to the business. Let's go.
You got it. And there's two real concepts when we come to the change side of things, and being able to take that from a concept that makes complete sense to action that actually improves results. There's two critical principles. Culture is built through shared learning and mutual experience. It's a group thing. We've got to take the group through it. We've got to learn. We've got to translate it to results. And as you said, people have to like it more than other approaches. And secondly, which is often forgotten, is that the culture is really transmitted through these climate factors and behavioral norms, all these systems, structures, processes, and these expectations that might be very different than the values we see on the wall. So if we don't design that improvement effort to drive learning, but also to go at our systems and processes in a little different way in a targeted area, and to be intentional about the from to we're trying to facilitate, then that shared learning might be just that, well, that from is holding us back again, and we haven't really figured it out. So it's these two in tandem that really are at the forefront of that learning experience and initial innovation prototype effort.
Right on. And when we don't have, the understanding and the knowledge of, oh, this is how we have to think about, if we don't have this perspective for how to think about changing culture, then we wind up doing the things that are fluffy, or we overcompensate and make it too heavy. And that's why there is so much skepticism. And that's why most of the culture of innovation programs don't work, because there's a lot of work to be done up front. There's a lot of understanding and perspective to kind of leverage that excitement and commitment towards something, an approach that's going to be effective. And you called it a improvement. What'd you call it? What'd you call the project? Like, you don't typically use the term prototype. You say business improvement plan.
Yeah, I mean, it's a performance improvement or mission priority that we're really focused on a plan in a targeted area to drive learning quickly, deliver results, but we're adjusting that current plan that already exists or the current approach based on what we've learned through the assessment process.
And so that's what we're going to talk about next. We're going to jump into the transformation portion. And again, these are all very much intertwined. But just to break it apart so we can talk about each section independently, we're going to talk about the transformation piece, and we like to use the metaphor of the iceberg. Everybody's familiar with the metaphor of the iceberg. What's above the line, above the waterline, is stuff that we can see. That's the results that we have. And Tim, you just said it, how do we deliver quick, high impact, real business results, and at the same time generate advocacy that's powerful because it's personal and it's real, having come from the learn by doing approach. We're going to get that. The idea of the doing part, the executing part, which is underneath the water, right? So, but still somewhat visible. How do we support the teams that are going through these business improvement plans or the prototypes, so that where they're actually really, real time, real world, addressing a specific business priority in a way that's we're doing it differently. Hopefully, we're practicing some more effective interaction and co-creation skills across silos, across teams. And we're going to talk now about what's at the bottom of the iceberg. What's the part that is most invisible, hardest to see, hardest to understand, but has the greatest leverage towards changing the doing and delivering on the results that we want. And that's the mindsets and skill sets. And how do we, how do these things show up? In most cases, the mindsets are actually anchoring the organizational contradictions, and we're going to give a few examples of these contradictions, and these are hidden beliefs and assumptions, and these traditions that exist that are invisible are always in practice, right? And typically, these traditions are stronger than our good intentions to change. They wind up acting like a brake on and stop the behavior that we're trying to do, even if intellectually we understand, hey, I should be more collaborative now. These hidden beliefs keep me from being able to do it. It's not because I'm not smart. It's not because I don't care. It's not because I'm not capable. It's because I have these underlying mindsets, immunities to change, if you will, that are getting in the way. And they're not obvious. They're very personal and often fear-based or scarcity mindset-based. So that means they're very strong and will definitely get in the way. And they might show up like this, right? The wish to do something different, like dare to think innovatively, is interceded by a mindset, these underlying assumptions and beliefs that if I try something new and fail, I could be blamed and punished, and nobody wants to be blamed and punished because it's going to be bad for my job and bad for my future with the company. I'm going to end up homeless on the street. And so naturally, I'm committed to not failing. I'm committed to not being exposed and blamed. So that's going to definitely hamper the ability to try new things and experiment. And even in a culture where the espoused value is it's okay to fail, like large, giant bureaucratic organizations where they even want to, to say it's okay, the underlying mindset is no way, that's not true. My belief is something very contradictory. Another one is, challenge with humility. Hey, let's stop all the political niceties. Speak up. Say what's on your mind about this idea or that idea or what we should be doing differently. But in reality, in the mindset is, if I speak up and challenge, I might be seen as disruptive. I might be viewed as a troublemaker. The last guy that did it got in big trouble, and this is going to put me at risk, and I'm committed to staying safe. And lastly, act collaboratively. The underlying beliefs and assumptions, where the contradiction resides is, if I give up resources for the sake of greater good and to collaborate and share, I may be putting my own objectives at risk, and my own performance will look bad, and my team is going to be unhappy with me, and they're not going to follow me anymore, and I'm going to lose their trust. My priorities have to matter more, so I can't be collaborative. So you can see how these contradictions are so strong that they wind up getting in the way. And so organizational contradictions, yes, they anchor the behavioral norms. I like the picture over there on the right. Where, as an example here, this current culture, this company that is competitive, silo-driven, focused on results, winds up being focused on results at the expense of trust, creativity, engagement, empowerment. And these are the types of hidden beliefs and assumptions that are underneath it that we need to be able to see and understand that this is what's going on, right? This belief that if you're a good employee, you'll survive no matter what, even if it's a hostile and aggressive environment. And you'll just stay and put up with it, and it's okay. If you're tough, it won't bother you. And the belief that, hey, all that matters is short-term results. It doesn't matter if we say what matters most is the customer. Behind the scenes, inside of our minds, the belief is that short-term results matter, and that there's this us and them kind of mentality that happens too, whereas those people are not smart enough to help us with this, so we just have to do it ourselves. Or the best one, the biggest, most common one is, we don't have time to involve other groups, therefore we can't possibly collaborate and get over this silo-driven thing. That's why it exists. And it shows up as behaviors like not involving others, not open to debate, without fearing what's going to happen if I do challenge, and not feeling comfortable sharing ideas and problems. So, a metaphor, typically I'll act it out, but here it is on a slide, the idea of, if we just focus on changing behavior, and often companies will have a list of the new behaviors that we want people to follow, because it's an intuitive thing to do, is, and everybody's going to say intellectually, okay, I want to do the ideal culture stuff. I want to do the new innovative stuff as well, and I'm going to try and do it. But those underlying mindsets wind up being like a parachute holding us back, right? No matter how hard we try, the default mindsets that exist in myself and the team and in the culture hold us back. So only by focusing on the mindsets can we unlock and shift towards, even the possibility of sustainable behavior change. Like, to get to a capability that we can build and master requires that we unlock it from the mindset first. So we want to shift from a knower, and a victim mindset to more of a learner, player, creator mindset. Once we make the shift and address the mindset piece of it, it'll start to pull us forward. And that even though there's high stress and tension, the creative energy now pulls us towards these new mindsets and then the new behaviors as well. And often, and just as one way to kind of bring it to life, the wish is, hey, I want my team to be more creative. Can you guys just come in and do a workshop that makes them more creative? Yes, we could. There's a process for that. But typically the creative muscle requires, it comes from a curiosity muscle. To be more creative, you have to first be more curious. And that has some other elements built into it. And before you can actually be curious, you have to want to work on humility. The humility muscle is what drives the curiosity muscle, which leads to the creativity muscle. So, hey, do you want to do a workshop on creativity? Well, first we should do something that's focused on humility. How about we work on that for a while? And that'll unlock all the rest of it. And to build these mindsets, it is a more deliberate, intense program of working on building the practice to get to mastery. And adult development's not a secret. There's not a black box. It has to be practiced and accelerated and deepened by doing it together. So different types of programs that help learn and practice together. A peer-based learning environment is how you really speed up the process. And lastly here, we want to get into the, okay, so how do these things intertwine together in the execution format? What does a plan look like? Let's look at that here, and I'm going to breeze right through this because we talked about already. How do we get to mindsets, behaviors which drive results? The idea of the work be done is quite simple. So we're going to talk about this in the context of the scientific method. The scientific method is very much the lean startup way. It's very much the design thinking way. It's very much the OODA loop, agile. All this stuff is the same. It's just worded differently, and it's got different cycle times. But don't let a lack of mastery in these different innovation processes be the thing that holds you back from diving into creating a more entrepreneurial culture, more innovative culture, and taking kind of the high level principle here is of learn by doing and applying it to the high priority business needs is how we model this. And most companies can only speculate how the organization is going to respond to and resist change. And there's no way, I have not seen an enterprise level cascading plan be successful on its own right out of the gate. You have to really have built in and answered the questions like, hey, how do we define the way teams are going to connect up and down to be most effective? How do we break down the silos and build the cross-functional teams? What are the norms that we talked about that are getting in the way and working against us? And why are those there? What are the causal factors? Why are those there? And how do we define and measure the new elements? What things are working and what things aren't, so we can build on the stuff that are and don't waste time on the stuff that aren't? How do we do it in a way, and how do we build a version of this new culture in a micro culture so we can see the versions of progress, see how it demonstrates value, and then translate that into that learning into real value for the organization so it can be adopted? And we continuing with the prototype language is you take advantage of the existing business imperatives, right? Real world challenges and initiatives underway. And as a gift to the team, first leadership team has to identify which are the high priority ones that we think would benefit from having these new attributes built into it, these new practices. And then as a gift to the team, say, we're going to support you and infuse some of the best practices, some of the best eventuality system infused operating approaches that help you be different together sooner while you're delivering on the business imperatives, so that you can deliver on your objective. And at the end of it, you'll be able to tell a story about what worked well and how, man, we would not have achieved this initiative at the level of growth and the level of results that we did if we hadn't been able to be more collaborative, if we hadn't been able to kind of voice our own ideas and new perspectives about what might work better and challenge the boss and all those things that we've been talking about. So the idea of building a model that accelerates in the initiative in 2 sprints, 1 to 4 week sprints, that's how it works, right? So that you can actually, it forces kind of the iterative process and allows for learning and helps justify funding and adoption later based on what's working. You build it in a way that allows you to engage everyone differently from the beginning in a way that you're co-creating and validating what you're learning along the way. And the first idea is, oh, well, that's going to take longer, and we're in a hurry, we're busy, we're working on these things, we can't slow down to build this in. And I promise you, it speeds it up. Lean startup and agile, those things, these approaches speed up the process, or at least it helps you slow down so you can go faster later. And it's an integrated approach, if you will, integrating the entrepreneurship practices, tools, with some innovation, some real-time facilitation and advisory support to help people do both the mindset shift and the behavioral shift in action, under stress, under timelines, deadline deliverables, etc., and while you're building the competencies. And you can't really do any of that outside of the idea of having an innovation portfolio. We're actually helping the team talk through the prioritization, the expertise with discipline and accountability. So these things aren't just ideas everywhere and execution everywhere. There's got to be a high level view of what you're working on and why. We'll get into that in another time, but this is what the approach looks like. This is what the plan might look like. So bringing everything together that we've been talking about. You got your qualitative interviews and quantitative cultural assessment, right? Helping get to what the from to is. You're doing the debriefs about this, sharing the data and working with leaders to help prioritize what are the business priorities that if they were supported with this prototype approach, it would help them increase the likelihood of success for their initiative and deliver better business results. And then how do you bring those groups together and have collaboration sessions where you can co-create these prototypes, these pilot plans, whatever you want to call them, that are in service of delivering on the business priority. While you're doing that, at some point, there's all kinds of simultaneous stuff happening that I'm just rifling through here, but the idea of leadership impact assessments, right? An individual and team leadership assessment, so you can see where the levers are for individual team improvement plans. And then once you've chosen the prototypes, once you've chosen what the business imperatives are, that's when we're going to start to line up, okay, this is how we're going to learn while doing together. And we're going to focus it, not the whole enterprise. We're going to focus on a few business initiatives. So it's a low risk with potential high value learning opportunity, and under pressure, under deadline, we have to deliver real results. So it's real learning. So people who go through the process will get a better sense of what works. They'll get a better sense too of what structural issues, structural elements are in the way, reward systems, etc. And they'll come out of it with all kinds of ideas and input on the climate stuff as well as the culture stuff and what's working to help deliver and do our work better. And they're going to be able to talk about what they like the most. And again, simultaneously supporting those teams, you've got the individual and team application coaching, group coaching as needed, and real-time facilitation so that in the moment when stress is high and the default kind of counterproductive behaviors and mindsets are taking over, we can help the team recover more quickly and learn in the middle of it how to employ the processes, the mindset, the behaviors, the skills that are much more conducive to innovation teams and better innovation outcomes. And we build in, the debriefs and the sprint debriefs to better understand what's working and what's not all along the way. Again, if you're into lean startup and all the Eric Ries stuff, it's very much like that in that it helps learn by doing on real stuff. And the idea of alignment, transformation, execution, how it fits into this, just giving you some visuals there. And kind of wrapping it up here, the idea of it's these two things, the inner game and the outer game working together, intertwined in the helix. And I don't want to reiterate all of that. I'm going to stop, and I know we've got, somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes to talk through questions. And Tim, let me turn it back to you. I've been racing through. Anything else you wanted to add that I missed or clarify?
Well, just one thing that I want to cement, and I want to go back to that parachute, where it might be holding you back from a mindset standpoint to wanting it to pull you forward, that's not just a flip like a light switch, right? So what you talked about with this prototype structure of trying some new things with a team in an organized approach to drive learning faster, so you as an individual learn new ways to be more effective in the groups, to translate it to the results. Yes, we want to spread those to other groups and teams, but at least with those involved, they won't be able to stop spreading it, because those things that work, right, they're going to naturally apply those concepts on other improvement plans and strategies. So it starts to be a gradual shift of that parachute, but it only comes through combining this mindset shifting work, sometimes assessment, coaching, with the application on how do we bring it to light in a team to deliver results. So it's all self-reinforcing. And without both pieces, you don't drive the shared learning, and you don't end up shifting the work climate and these norms that are that parachute holding you back.
Nice, thank you. So
Thank you,
Barbie,
Tim.
I know we've got,
Thank you, Raf.
Yeah,
Yes,
take it away.
I have a few questions. I think this one is for you, Tim. Do we really need another assessment to tell us that we are not innovative? We know that we aren't. Our engagement or morale survey already told us that we need to change. What do you recommend we tell the CEO?
Well, your engagement or morale survey was a climate survey, right? So yes, we know our engagement isn't good or innovation isn't good, but we don't know culturally what's driving it. We don't know what those expectations are, and is it a bunch of aggressive stuff that's holding us back, or is this passive stuff, or is it the combination of both? So unless we get a language around it through some approach, and assessment is one approach, it's hard to go at this to drive the understanding needed. So we're making that invisible organization visible. Yes, the lack of innovation and engagement is already visible, but we don't really have a good way of having a good language around what isn't visible, what's going through people's heads, so we can tackle it effectively. So yeah, I advocate an assessment, qualitative and quantitative. There's other ways to create that understanding, but let's go below the surface.
That's great. Thank you, Tim. And this is for either one of you. Does the whole company or a whole culture really have to be innovative or creative?
Yeah, I'll take it, Tim. And the answer is no, not at the same degree. There's those two systems that I talked about. There's definitely a huge need for the reliability system. So suggesting that everybody needs to be on the far right eventuality side would kind of ruin the idea of the polarity and about managing the polarity, which is what we want. And it varies depending on what's happening in the industry, what's happening with competitors, and what your goals are would drive which regions, which roles, which groups need to be more innovative than others, and whether it's centralized or distributed, very unique for each company, each situation, each context.
Yeah, I would add that over the long term, that maybe the answer is that, yeah, we better be moving in that direction of being more adaptive and innovative. I mean, what we've seen with, industries and organizations being totally disrupted is that if you're not at least working along that path, and yeah, you might not be there in your whole organization, but if you're not working to be more innovative and adaptive in the marketplace, you could really be blindsided, and then it makes it very difficult to, implement well-organized improvement efforts when you're just trying to keep the lights on.
Great, thank you. One more question, because we're short on time. Is there a danger of creating a learning culture within a dominant culture of aggressive defensive that ultimately crushes the startup culture?
Yes. By definition, right? There's no one culture, right? So what you're trying to do here is kind of get, a little subculture going and prove it works, right? And only if it works will others say, yeah, maybe we should try that approach more broadly, or we should try it on these other innovative, other initiatives. But yeah, the danger is it will be completely crushed. So that's why there has to be a leadership team behind it. Doesn't need to be the top of the whole organization, but maybe in a department, a division, a location, or something that supports seeing this through on a top priority and using some new techniques to accelerate results. And that always looks better than the path that's lacking the inclusion, lacking the communication where people aren't speaking up. So just give it a shot and you'll see that the approach is substantially better.
Great. Well, thank you, Tim. Thank you, Raf, for today's sessions. I hope everyone enjoyed it, and we will post the recording online shortly. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everyone, for attending.
See everybody. If you have additional questions that we couldn't get to, feel free to email. Happy to jump on the phone and talk through any other additional information you'd like.